The series begins with a doctor who is living a normal life between his home and his work at the hospital, and with his beloved wife. However, everything changed when a very sick girl with an unknown illness was brought to him. The doctor tried to treat her, but he failed. We then discovered that the girl was infected with a contagious virus, and soon the virus began to spread, infecting everyone. One day, the doctor found that his wife was sick, so he rushed her to the hospital, hoping she would be okay. As days passed, the doctor was at the hospital when a nurse came and asked him to follow her immediately. When he arrived at the nursery in the hospital, he found several babies. But what was strange about these children was that they were hybrids, part human and part animal, with each child being a mix with a different animal. The doctor was shocked and did not understand what was happening. From that moment, a new type of being known as hybrids appeared. Children born with both human and animal traits. No one knew the reason behind the birth of these children, nor if the virus was the cause of this phenomenon. We then shift to a man named Pubba, the father of a beautiful child named Gus. Gus was also a hybrid, as he was part deer, having antlers and ears like a deer. Pubba decided to isolate himself from society to protect his son, as humans everywhere hated hybrids and blamed them for the spread of the virus that was killing people. So, Pubba took Gus and went deep into the forest, where they found an abandoned house and began to set it up to live there. Pubba organized the house and its surroundings in the forest, even building a barbed wire fence around the house to protect them from anyone who might approach. Pubba and Gus lived a happy life for a long time, and Pubba always taught his son everything he knew. One of the most important lessons he taught him was never to leave the fenced area and to avoid humans at all costs because they were all dangerous. One day, Gus saw a government plane flying overhead and dropping flyers. Pubba retrieved one of the flyers and read that the government was asking for the surrender of hybrid children to special sanctuaries to protect them, as they could no longer live among humans. Of course, Pubba would never do that with his son, so he decided to be even more cautious and forget about it entirely. One day, Gus saw a deer and was overjoyed because he thought this deer resembled his mother. He asked his father about her, and Pubba explained that the deer was not his mother, that his mother was a regular human woman. But she had left them long ago, and he didn't know what had become of her. Afterward, Pubba took a box that contained papers and pictures related to Gus's mother and buried it somewhere in the forest so that Gus couldn't find it or learn anything about her. The happy days between Pubba and Gus continued until one day, a stranger appeared at the fence, trying to get in. Pubba stopped him and told him to head for the main road where he would be safe. The stranger told Pubba that the internet had been down for a while, and since then, the world had descended into chaos. There was no longer any government, military, or system of order, and people were now living in primitive tribes. He added that while the virus had slowed down, it was still present, and humans had started hunting hybrids, believing them to be the cause of the world's destruction. As the man continued speaking, he noticed Gus, who quickly disappeared from sight. Pubba discovered that the man had marked the fence to indicate there was a hybrid child living there. Afterward, Pubba took Gus and hid him in the house's basement before going out to kill the stranger. Not long after, Pubba returned to Gus, but he was severely wounded from the fight. He collapsed, and Gus took him inside the house, staying by his side, hoping he would recover. The next day, Pubba regained consciousness briefly and began to tell Gus about his mother, Birdie, explaining that she was a regular human, not a deer as Gus had thought. Pubba promised to tell Gus everything about his mother, but first, he asked him to bring some eggs. Gus went to get the eggs, but when he returned, he found that his father had died from his injuries, leaving Gus in shock and deep sorrow. After the death of his father, Gus starts managing everything on his own at the place, and it was very difficult for him because his father used to do everything. As a result, Gus finds himself in a state of chaos, but he endures and tries to learn everything on his own. One day, Gus accidentally discovers a box his father had hidden for a long time. Inside the box, Gus finds pictures of his mother with Colorado written on them, which makes him realize that his mother might be in Colorado. He then decides to leave the camp his father had built for him, and for the first time in his life, he steps outside to search for his mother. Gus prepares himself and gets ready to leave, but he finds a piece of chocolate on the ground, takes it, and eats it, finding it delightful. Moments later, he finds another piece of chocolate, but while reaching for it, an arrow suddenly strikes the spot from where he didn't expect. Gus quickly flees and hides, but a man manages to capture him. It turns out that this man and his partner were hunting hybrids, and they were ecstatic because they had never found a talking hybrid before, which increased their amazement. They decided to take Gus with them, but Gus manages to strike them and escape. One of the men prepares to shoot an arrow to kill Gus, but suddenly, a man named Tommy appears and shoots the hunter, killing him, while the other hunter flees. Afterward, Tommy approaches Gus to calm him down and tries to understand why he lives there and who his family is, but Gus refuses to reveal anything, so Tommy decides to leave him alone, advising him to take care of himself. A short while later, Gus decides to travel to Colorado to look for his mother, taking some supplies he might need, and leaves in a hurry. Gus crosses the barbed wire for the first time in his life and begins his journey into the outside world. Gus finds Tommy and asks him to help him get to Colorado, as there is no one else who can help him. However, Tommy refuses because he doesn't want to get involved with Gus, as having a hybrid child with him would put him in constant danger. Gus continues to follow Tommy, walking behind him until he forces Tommy to allow him to stay with him. At night, Tommy is forced to feed Gus because, despite everything, Gus is still a child. The next day, Tommy wakes up to discover that Gus had eaten all the food he had, and even consumed some of Tommy's medicine, thinking it was candy. Tommy gets angry at Gus and tells him that they must work together to secure food, and then they will part ways. Shortly after, they see a house in the middle of the forest. Tommy asks Gus to enter the house to check if anyone is inside while Tommy waits outside with his rifle. Gus enters the house and finds a deer head mounted as decoration, which scares him, and he attempts to flee, but he falls into a trap and gets caught in the air. The family living in the house, consisting of the father George, the mother Bev, and their child Rusty, appears. This family does not harm Gus, but instead hosts him and Tommy, offering them plenty of food. They were all surprised by Gus, as it was the first time they had seen a talking hybrid of this age. After eating, Gus plays with Rusty and feels great happiness because, for the first time, he is playing with a child his age. On the same day, Tommy is caught stealing some food from the house to take with him when he returns to the forest. Bev catches him and asks what he is doing, and he explains that he didn't want to harm anyone. Bev notices a tattoo on Tommy's body, indicating that he was part of a dangerous group that used to kill people after the apocalypse. She tells Tommy she is worried that he might still be connected to this group, but Tommy assures her that he is no longer part of them and that he now lives a peaceful life without problems. At night, Gus wakes up to find that Tommy is trying to sneak away from the house, leaving Gus heartbroken. While they stand, they hear sounds outside the house and discover that a group of hunters, who hunt hybrids, has arrived after learning that Gus was living there. Tommy orders Gus to hide quickly, while Tommy goes out to confront the gang. Tommy starts fighting the hunters one by one until he takes them all down, except for one who enters the house and starts searching for Gus. Gus manages to wound the hunter in the leg, but the hunter threatens to kill him. At the last moment, Tommy appears and kills the hunter, saving Gus. The next day, we see Tommy preparing his belongings as he plans to leave with Gus, since George and Bev decided they couldn't keep Gus with them because he would put them in danger. Indeed, Tommy and Gus take what they need in terms of food and supplies, bid farewell to the kind family, and continue their journey. On the other side, we see the doctor who appeared at the beginning of the story, the one who discovered the virus. We now learn that his name is Dr. Aditya, and he is still living with his wife Ronnie. Although she was infected with the virus previously, she hadn't died. One day, while Aditya was playing with Ronnie, he suddenly noticed that her hand started trembling, which meant the virus had returned. Immediately, Aditya gives her a strange treatment, and her condition stabilizes. It turns out that this treatment was invented by Dr. Gladys, and it doesn't cure the virus completely, but controls it for a long period. Aditya had been using this treatment for Ronnie for a long time, and every time the virus symptoms returned, he would give her a dose of the treatment. But the problem now is that the treatment is almost running out, so Aditya decides to visit Dr. Gladys to get more doses. When he reaches Gladys, she gives him new doses of the treatment, but also tells him that she is terminally ill with cancer and will die soon, so she won't be able to make more of the treatment. Therefore, she hands him a book containing all the information on how to create the treatment, so Aditya can make it himself for his wife Ronnie, and possibly even develop it into a permanent cure for the virus. Aditya thanks Dr. Gladys and leaves. A short while later, Aditya returns to Ronnie and tells her everything that happened, admitting that he won't be able to make the treatment because, after reading the book, he realized that the process of creating it is extremely complicated. Ronnie is surprised and begins reading the book herself, but we still don't know exactly what they discovered in the book. It seems that Dr. Gladys had been creating the treatment in a crazy and gruesome manner. We now go back to the past to meet another important character, Amy, a psychologist. Before the apocalypse, Amy lived a normal life and worked in her clinic. But everything changed when one of her patients got infected with the virus. Amy realized then that a dangerous virus had spread across the world, so she decided to isolate herself in her clinic and not leave until the virus problem was solved. Amy stayed in her clinic for a very long time until she became bored and finally decided to go out and see the world. When she stepped outside after all that time, she was shocked to find that the world had been completely destroyed and devastation was everywhere. As she was taking in her surroundings, she was surprised to see a group of elephants approaching her, realizing that the city's zoo had been opened and the animals had escaped. Immediately, Amy went to the zoo and decided from that moment on to take care of the animals there and live in the same place. After some time, Amy found a box in front of the zoo, and inside it was a hybrid baby resembling a pig. The baby was very young, and it seemed that someone had abandoned him. Amy felt compassion for the hybrid child and decided to take him in and raise him herself. We now return to the present, where we see Dr. Aditya taking on Dr. Gladys's role, treating people just as she did. At the same time, Aditya begins studying the book Gladys gave him. From the book, we learn that Dr. Gladys was making Ronnie's treatment using human bone marrow and other bodily fluids, and she had been experimenting on hybrid children. This is why gangs were kidnapping hybrids, to perform similar experiments like those of Gladys in hopes of creating a cure for the virus. However, Aditya refuses to follow Dr. Gladys's methods and tries to find a cure for the virus without harming hybrid children. One day, a group of soldiers comes to Aditya and provides him with all the equipment he might need, although he doesn't know how or where it was made. Later, we see Aditya with his wife Ronnie, whose hand starts trembling again due to the return of the virus, and she is no longer taking the treatment as before. Ronnie tells her husband Aditya that she wants to go to a party being held by their neighbors in the city, but he refuses, fearing that people would discover she is infected with the virus, which could lead to her being killed. However, Ronnie convinces him that if they don't go, the neighbors might become suspicious and could possibly kill them. In the end, Aditya agrees, and they go to the party. During the party, there was a man named Doug. Suddenly, Doug's hand starts trembling, and he drops the cup he was holding. Immediately, the attendees grab him and ask Aditya to examine him. Aditya checks him and confirms that he is infected with the virus. Quickly, the attendees tie him up and take him outside the house, then set the house on fire with Doug inside, fearing that he might spread the virus to others. Ronnie is horrified because she realizes that this is what will happen to her if people find out about her illness. We now leave Aditya and Ronnie and return to Tommy and Gus, who are still together. Tommy tells Gus that the next day they will take a train, which will take Gus to Colorado to search for his mother, meaning they will part ways for good. For now, Tommy takes Gus to an old bus, which is supposed to be Tommy's hideout. Tommy starts searching inside the bus for some medicine, as Gus had used up everything he had, but he only finds one pill, so he takes it. Afterward, Tommy decides to go to the market near the train station to buy more medicine. The next day, Tommy takes Gus to the train station and leaves him in a safe spot, while Tommy goes to buy the medicine and a ticket. Tommy puts a hat on Gus's head to hide his antlers and tells him if anyone asks about them, he should say they are part of a costume and not real. He also warns Gus not to move his ears because people would then realize he's a hybrid. Gus agrees, and Tommy goes to get the medicine and ticket. Meanwhile, Gus wanders around and comes across a group of children playing a strange game, pretending to hunt hybrids. Gus feels scared, and at that moment a girl appears and immediately realizes that Gus is a hybrid. She tries to calm him down so that others won't discover it. She offers Gus to come with her to a place where she lives with her group, assuring him that he will be safe. As Gus is about to go with her, Tommy arrives just in time and pulls him away. After that, the two head to the train, where Gus is supposed to board to go to Colorado to search for his mother. While waiting, Gus notices a group of soldiers loading crates onto the train, and with his keen sense of smell, he realizes that the crates contain medicine, including the medicine Tommy needs. Gus tells Tommy this, and Tommy gets excited and decides to steal the medicine before boarding the train. They sneak together into the carriage carrying the crates, and Tommy starts searching for the medicine. At that moment, a soldier arrives and catches them, but Tommy doesn't hesitate and attacks him. After a short struggle, Tommy takes the medicine he needs and prepares to leave with Gus. However, another soldier shows up, and while Tommy is trying to fight him off, the soldier notices Gus's ears moving and realizes he's a hybrid. Despite this, Tommy manages to overpower the soldier and knocks him unconscious. Tommy takes Gus to the train, but before they can board, the soldier Tommy had knocked out returns with a group of other soldiers. They capture Gus and Tommy and take them to their camp. But before they reach the camp, they are attacked by an armed group, and the leader of this group is the same girl who met Gus earlier. It turns out that this girl and her group work to protect hybrids like Gus, but it's still unclear whether the girl and her group are also hybrids or not. The girl, whose name is Bear, and her group decide to take Gus and Tommy to safety. At the same time, we see a soldier heading to the army camp and meeting with the commander, General Abbott. The soldier tells Abbott that the girl they have been searching for has resurfaced, which angers Abbott, and he decides to take action to hunt her down. It seems that the girl in question is the same one who saved Gus and Tommy. Back with Tommy and Gus, Bear notices a tattoo on Tommy's chest, the same tattoo we mentioned earlier. Based on this, Bear and her group decide to kill Tommy, but Gus begs her not to. Bear decides not to kill Tommy, but chooses to imprison him until they can decide whether he poses a threat or not. As for Gus, Bear takes him aside to talk to him and tells him that her group consists of ordinary humans, but they decided to protect hybrids after seeing how they were persecuted by humans. That's the goal of their group. Afterward, Bear introduces Gus to the rest of her group, introducing them one by one. Gus has a great time with them and plays all day. Later, Bear sits with Gus and tells him about a group called the Last Men, a group made up of former soldiers and powerful people. This group had been hunting Gus and his father since they left their camp. Bear reveals a shocking truth to Gus. Tommy was once a member of this group, and the proof is the tattoo on his body. Bear tells Gus that they need to get rid of Tommy because of the crimes he committed with this group against people. Gus feels afraid for Tommy and asks Bear to let him see him first. Bear agrees and takes Gus to see Tommy, who is tied up. Bear asks Tommy to confess the truth about his life. Tommy admits that he was indeed part of the Last Men, but he left them a long time ago and stopped committing the crimes they were involved in. Gus believes Tommy and sympathizes with him, asking Bear to release him, but she refuses. After a short while, we see that Bear gathers her entire group in a specific location. Then Bear comes with Gus, and Tommy is still tied up as he was. Bear is supposed to announce her verdict on Tommy. Bear surprises everyone by deciding to pardon Tommy, a decision that doesn't sit well with many members of her group, including a girl named Tiger. Tiger decides to kill Tommy herself and orders the group to release the tiger, Lizzie, to kill Tommy. Indeed, they open a car trunk containing the tiger, and they prepare to release it to kill Tommy. But Gus speaks to the tiger and asks it not to harm Tommy. Strangely, the tiger listens to him as if it understands and returns to the trunk. Tiger goes mad and tells everyone that she is no longer part of their group. At that moment, all the group members agree with Tiger, and they decide that she will become their new leader. Gus takes advantage of the chaos and unties Tommy, and the two escape together. Bear also decides to flee with them, knowing she will be harmed if she stays, so she leaves the place and joins them in the escape. We now switch to Amy, where we see that the hybrid child she found has grown a bit, and it turns out she is a girl, not a boy. Her name is Wendy, and she now lives with Amy, leading a happy life in the park, trying to stay away from humans, especially the Last Men, because if they see Wendy, they will kill her. One day, while Amy is working on the garden, Wendy tells her that the amount of carrots has started to decrease. Amy asks if Wendy has been taking them, but she denies it. Later, they sit down to eat, and after finishing, Wendy takes some food without telling Amy, and places it in a specific spot in the garden. That night, the alarm system goes off, warning of someone inside the house or garden. Amy wakes up immediately, grabs her weapon, and goes to check the place. At that moment, Wendy confesses that she knew about a creature named Bobby living in the garden, and that he was the one taking the food. Wendy asks Amy to let Bobby stay with them, and Amy agrees. Later, Amy begins communicating with people over the radio and discovers that there is a safe place for hybrids. She decides to gather all the hybrids there to keep them safe. We leave this scene and switch to Dr. Aditya, who has been having nightmares about the strange experiments Dr. Gladys conducted. Aditya wakes up in a panic, then sits with Rainey and tells her that he will find a cure for her very soon. Aditya leaves his house, mounts his horse, and heads to work. On his way, he meets his neighbor Nancy, who tells him that strange purple flowers have started to appear in the city, meaning that the virus has spread again. Nancy asks Aditya to examine all the city's residents to identify who is infected, but he refuses, knowing that this will lead to Ronnie being burned as well. Aditya leaves Nancy and goes to the hospital, where he takes a flare gun from Dr. Gladys's bag and fires a shot into the sky. We will learn the reason for this later. When Aditya returns home, he is surprised to find Nancy sitting with Ronnie and has discovered that Ronnie is sick. Nancy decides to inform all the town's residents about Ronnie's condition so they can decide her fate. Nancy leaves the house and Aditya tries to convince her not to do this, but she insists. At that moment, Aditya's horse kicks Nancy, throwing her away and causing her death. Aditya and Ronnie feel relieved that their secret won't be exposed now. They take Nancy's body and hide it so that no one accuses them of killing her. We now switch to General Abbott, the leader of the last men. Abbott goes to a house where Dr. Gladys lives, and we discover that she didn't die as previously thought. Abbott speaks with Gladys and reveals that she faked her illness because she no longer wanted to work with him and cause more hybrid children to be killed. He tells her that he doesn't care about her but just wants to know where the book containing the formula for the cure is. Gladys tells him that the book is with Aditya and that he is the one working in the clinic now, trying to make the cure. Afterward, Abbott leaves, having obtained what he wanted. One of his men enters the room and kills Gladys, although we don't see this directly. We return to Dr. Aditya, who is gathering the purple flowers growing in abundance outside his house, knowing that these flowers appear because Ronnie is sick. While Aditya is gathering the flowers, his neighbor Bob arrives and asks him about Nancy, as he hasn't seen her in a while. Aditya tells him that he knows nothing about her. Bob leaves, and Aditya returns to the house, where he sits with Ronnie and talks. Through their conversation, we understand that Aditya fired the flare because Dr. Gladys wrote in her book that if he wanted to get the secret mixture that could cure Ronnie, he had to fire a signal into the sky, and Abbott and his men would bring it. The mixture contains extracts from hybrids which are used in creating the cure. Aditya tells Ronnie that the mixture will arrive today, and he will be able to make the cure for her. After that, Aditya takes Ronnie to the clinic to see if the mixture has arrived. When they arrive, they notice that the nurse who works with Aditya is missing, and they become worried. They enter the clinic's fridge and discover that they had hidden Nancy's body there. They fear that the nurse may have seen the body, which is why she left the clinic to report them. They decide to flee, but before they can escape, they find all the town's residents standing in front of the clinic. The nurse had told them that Aditya and Ronnie killed Nancy, and that Ronnie is sick. Bob tells Aditya that they will burn Ronnie because of her illness. They take the two back to their house and start lighting the fire. Aditya and Ronnie realize that this is their end and that there is no hope. But suddenly, Abbott and his men arrive and extinguish the fire. We don't yet know what Abbott wants from Aditya. On the other side, we see that Amy has raised several hybrid children in the park, not just Wendy. Everything was going well until one day Amy found signs posted on the park's fence, indicating that Abbott's group had found them and was preparing to attack. Amy is worried and unsure of what to do, and we'll see what happens later. We now return to Tommy and Gus, who, after escaping from Bear's group, decide to head to Colorado together. Tommy decided to accompany Gus because Gus saved him from Bear's group, and he wants to repay the favor. While traveling, they meet Bear, who had escaped her group and decided to join them. Bear tells Gus that she had searched for his mother and found an address where she might be. She gives him a piece of paper with information about his mother so he can find her when he reaches Colorado. Bear tells the group that she plans to board a train to a sanctuary where hybrids live, hinting that the sanctuary is the same park that Amy runs. The three decide to travel together and board the train. However, to reach the train, they must pass through a place called the Valley of Death, a region filled with the purple flowers that appeared due to the virus's spread. Everyone is afraid of crossing the valley, as it could mean exposure to the virus. Luckily, there is a wooden bridge above the valley that they can cross. Gus starts crossing the bridge, but unfortunately it cannot hold his weight, and he falls into the valley among the flowers. Gus loses consciousness and starts dreaming about his father, Pubba, who advises him to take care of himself. After a while, Gus wakes up to find that Tommy and Bear had rescued him, and none of them were infected with the virus. After checking on Gus, they decide to continue their journey to the train. Soon after, the three arrive at the train, which is moving very fast, so they decide to jump onto it. Gus jumps first, followed by Bear, but Tommy is a bit late. At the last moment, Tommy remembers his days as a football player, gathers his strength, and runs fast enough to jump onto the train at the last second. Once things have calmed down, Gus starts searching for his beloved toy, the little dog his father Pubba made for him, but he can't find it, which makes him sad. While searching for the toy, everyone hears someone approaching their carriage. Quickly, they all hide. The person enters the carriage and, unfortunately, finds Gus, who is still searching for his toy. The person who grabbed Gus was one of the train workers, and he started handling him roughly. Before he could hurt him, Tommy arrives and begins fighting the worker. The two exchange blows until Tommy recognizes the worker as his old friend, Jimmy. The fighting stops and Jimmy remembers Tommy, and the two sit down to talk about old memories. Tommy notices that Jimmy seems a bit crazy, but he doesn't pay much attention to it. Meanwhile, Bear discovers that Gus is missing, and everyone tells her that he was looking for his toy. Everyone starts searching for him until Jimmy and Tommy find him. At that moment, Bear informs them that the last men soldiers are on the train, making everyone feel scared. They decide to escape to the last carriage on the train. When they reach the last carriage, Jimmy and Tommy lock the door, unsure of what to do. Tommy sees the soldiers in the opposite carriage and also spots Gus's toy, which he had been looking for. Without hesitation, Tommy goes to retrieve the toy, but the soldiers see him and recognize him as a former member of their group before he escaped. The soldiers decide to kill him. Tommy attacks them and escapes, returning to the carriage where Jimmy and the others are. Jimmy tells Tommy that he must jump off the train with Gus and Bear, while he tries to hold off the soldiers. Tommy realizes that the soldiers will eventually kill Jimmy, but he has no other option. Tommy says goodbye to his old friend Jimmy and jumps off the train with Bear and Gus. Jimmy continues fighting the soldiers until they overpower him, and we sadly learn that they will kill him. Meanwhile, Tommy, Gus, and Bear continue their journey toward the city where Gus's mother lives. At the same time, we see that Abbott is still with Dr. Aditya and his wife Ronnie. After Abbott and his men extinguish the fire in the house, Abbott begins searching for the book that Dr. Gladys wrote, and he manages to find it. Abbott selfishly decides to take the book and leave, abandoning Aditya and Ronnie to be killed by the townspeople. However, Aditya and Ronnie speak to him and lie, telling him that they know a way to create a permanent cure for the virus, which is not written in Gladys's book. Abbott thinks for a while and eventually decides to take Aditya and Ronnie with him. Aditya and Ronnie gather their belongings from the house and leave with Abbott's men, unsure of what awaits them. On the other side, we see that Amy is still watching the signs she found earlier hanging on the park's fence. As mentioned before, Amy realizes at this moment that one of the last men has discovered the presence of hybrids in the park, and left these signs to guide the rest of the group to the location to capture the hybrids. At this point, Amy decides to act quickly. She takes Wendy and all the other hybrids in the park, and escapes with them through secret tunnels. She leaves herself alone in the park, armed and ready to fight the last men when they arrive. We now go back to the past to uncover more details about Gus's father, Pubba. We flash back to the past and discover that Pubba used to work as a janitor at a research facility called Fort Smith. It is said that the virus that destroyed the world originated from this facility. Pubba was in love with a scientist named Birdie, who is supposedly Gus's mother. One day, Pubba saw Birdie arguing with other scientists at the facility, but he didn't pay much attention and continued his work. At the end of the day, he went to the bar he frequented, and there he was surprised to see Birdie had come to the bar as well. Pubba tried to talk to her, and Birdie quickly warmed up to him. They sat together and talked about many things. During the conversation, Birdie told him that they had been working at the facility for a while on discovering a microbe that could cure any disease. They managed to find this microbe during an expedition to Alaska and used it to create treatments for many viruses. Birdie also told him she had used the microbe in various experiments, but she couldn't reveal the details of these experiments. After a while, Birdie received a call from her colleague, Judy, another scientist who worked with her at the facility. Judy told Birdie that the military had learned about the experiments the scientists were conducting and had raided the facility to seize all the research. Birdie then told Pubba that they couldn't allow the military to take the research because it could lead to the spread of viruses and the destruction of the world. She also told him that she needed to save something from the facility before the military arrived. Pubba decided to help her and took her to the facility. There, Birdie led him to a secret room inside the facility where there was a small child in a strange device. That child was Gus. At that moment, we learn that Gus is not the biological son of Birdie and Pubba, but rather a child created using the microbe that Birdie discovered. Gus was part of an experiment, and Birdie had been keeping him at the facility for research purposes. Birdie told Pubba that if the military discovered Gus, they would take him for experiments because he was just a child. So, Birdie handed Gus over to Pubba and asked him to flee with him, while she decided to stay at the facility to destroy the research before the military arrived. After that, we learn the story we already know. Pubba took Gus to the forest to live with him. We now understand that the virus indeed spread from the facility because of the military, and the military had been searching for Gus because he was the first hybrid in the world, with the other hybrids being born after him. We return to the present, where Tommy, Bear, and Gus arrive at Birdie's house, but they don't find her. Instead, they find a woman named Judy, the same scientist who worked with Birdie. When Judy sees Gus, she recognizes him immediately and tells him that she helped create him with Birdie at the Fort Smith facility. Judy invites the group into the house and sits with them to explain what happened in the past. She tells them that the military attacked their lab shortly before the virus spread worldwide, and that Judy and Birdie managed to escape and live in this house. However, Birdie left some time ago to search for Gus and Pubba and hasn't returned since. Judy tells the group that there's a room in the house containing all of Birdie's belongings, which might be helpful. Gus, Bear, and Tommy go up to Birdie's room and find many papers and experiments. From these papers, Gus discovers that he is not the biological son of Birdie and Pubba, but rather a child created in the labs. Gus is shocked when he realizes that Pubba, whom he considered his father and loved dearly, had been lying to him all along. Tommy tries to explain to Gus that Pubba didn't deceive him. He simply couldn't tell him the truth and that he truly raised and loved him. But Gus is not convinced and becomes extremely angry, feeling like he's lived his entire life in a lie. Gus runs out of the house, crying, and heads into the forest. While running through the forest, Gus finds an old plane covered in plants. He discovers that the plane has been there for many years. Inside the plane, he finds working communication devices and papers talking about sanctuaries set up by the military to protect hybrid children. Gus realizes that these announcements are the same ones that were broadcast when hybrid children first started appearing. He takes one of the papers, but we don't yet know what he plans to do with it. Shortly after, Tommy finds Gus, as he had been searching for him. Tommy sits with Gus and tries to comfort him, telling him that he understands Gus feels like he's lived his whole life in a lie, but Pubba truly loved him and kept him safe, so Gus shouldn't hate him. Tommy then begins to tell his own story to Gus. We flash back to the day the virus first spread. At that time, Tommy was at the hospital with his wife, who was about to give birth. His wife entered the operating room and gave birth to their child. After the birth, the doctor came and told Tommy that his wife had given birth to a boy, and Tommy felt happy and went to see his son. But he was shocked to find that the baby was a hybrid, half human and half goat. Tommy was horrified and disgusted, deciding to leave the hospital and abandon his son. He got into the elevator to leave the hospital, and by coincidence, Dr. Aditya, who worked at the hospital, was also in the elevator. When the doctor saw the shock on Tommy's face, he told him that the baby was still his son, and that he should embrace and love him. The doctor's words had an impact on Tommy, so he decided to return to take his son. But when he returned, he discovered that the military had already arrived and taken the baby. We return to the present, where we learn that Tommy hasn't known anything about his family since that day, and he blames himself for everything that happened to them. Meanwhile, Gus is shocked when Tommy tells him that he contacted the army to take him to a safe sanctuary. Tommy is surprised by this, and before he can think, he is shot and captured by Abbott's men. They take Gus for experimentation, as Gus didn't know that these were not army soldiers, but rather Abbott's men, and that he wasn't being taken to a safe sanctuary as he thought, but instead was going to be subjected to experiments. At the same time, Abbott and his men arrive at the zoo with tanks and weapons to take the hybrid children from Amy. Abbott speaks with Amy before storming the park and demands she hand over the hybrid children. Amy refuses and tells him she won't surrender anyone and that she has a surprise for him. She ends the call and suddenly, fireworks she had prepared explode, creating a powerful blast that burns everything in the area. However, Abbott's men recover quickly and begin searching for Amy and the hybrid children everywhere. Indeed, Abbott's men manage to find all the hybrid children, including Wendy and Bobby, and capture them all. Amy escapes, and once she's sure Abbott and his men have left, she goes to the church where the hybrid children were supposed to be hiding. But she doesn't find them and realizes that Abbott's men have captured them, which drives her to madness. Shortly after, we see Dr. Aditya in Abbott's laboratory. His wife, Ronnie, is locked in an isolated room and he cannot communicate with her because she is sick. Abbott arrives and tells Aditya that he doesn't believe he will be able to create a cure as he claimed, which is why he will keep his wife imprisoned until he does. If Aditya fails, Abbott will kill her easily. Abbott also tells him that he has brought several hybrid children for him to experiment on, just as Gladys did. Aditya is furious with the situation, but he's forced to comply. A soldier named Johnny brings the first hybrid child to Aditya for experimentation, and that child is Gus. Aditya feels sympathy for Gus, so he gives him a piece of chocolate and tries to talk to him and calm him down. Aditya is shocked when Gus starts talking because the other hybrids couldn't speak. At that moment, Aditya decides not to experiment on Gus for now, and asks Johnny to return him to the prison, requesting another hybrid child for experimentation. Johnny agrees and takes Gus back to the prison, where he finds Wendy, Bobby, and the other hybrid children. Gus is overwhelmed with joy to have found his peers and forgets his previous fears and his happiness. Meanwhile, a woman finds the injured Tommy and takes him with her. Shortly after, Tommy wakes up in a strange place and realizes he hasn't fully recovered yet. Amy appears, and we learn that she is the one who saved him. She tells Tommy that she has been monitoring Abbott's group for a while and knows that they captured Gus and took many of the hybrid children she was taking care of. Amy suggests that she and Tommy work together to rescue the children and take them back from Abbott. Tommy agrees to the plan, and they decide to act. Meanwhile, Bear is still at Judy's house, unaware of what happened to Gus or Tommy. While she waits, Judy asks Bear about why Gus was created in the lab and what the connection is between the virus and the hybrid children. Judy tells Bear that Birdie created Gus on her own, and she doesn't know why. She also says that Birdie believed that the virus and the hybrid children were somehow connected, like two sides of the same coin, but she didn't know exactly what Birdie meant. Judy asks Bear about her past, and Bear begins to tell her story. We discover that Bear was adopted and lived a happy life with her adoptive parents. But one day, her parents were infected with the virus and died. The military came to take Bear, and by chance they found Bear's younger sister, who had just been born and was a hybrid, and they took her too. Bear couldn't stop them because she was just a little girl at the time, and since then she hasn't known where her sister went or whether she is still alive. After Bear finishes sharing her memories, she sits with Judy. At that moment, Bear discovers a working satellite phone in Birdie's room. She tries to call the other phone, but it doesn't connect. Bear keeps trying all day, and finally, at night, someone answers the call. It's Birdie, and Bear discovers that Birdie is still alive and living in Alaska, where she is conducting experiments in hopes of finding a cure for the virus. Birdie asks who is speaking to her, and the season ends at this point.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.